In this video, I'm going to show you how to add juice to your game so that your game feel improves dramatically and you can go from something like this slightly boring and uninteresting shooter into something a little bit more like this. So the first thing we really want to do here is make shooting feel like an event. Right now it's just really boring. Whenever you shoot, there's just no indication that you've actually done something. And so we need to give a little bit of feedback visually to the player to make that the case. So the first thing we're going to do is add some muzzle flash to our game. So toward that end, I drew up this really simple muzzle flash texture in Sprite. Now you can find tons of similar muzzle flash textures all over the internet. Kenny's got some good ones in his free asset packs, specifically the top-down tank one I think has some great ones. So they're definitely out there, and you really don't need a really awesome high-def one. Anything will do in this case. And so if I flip over to the game, you'll see that I've added our muzzle flash. So when I shoot, there's a little bit of a flash. And again, it's not the best sprite in the world, but it's more than nothing and it helps. And you can also see, if you look closely, I've added some squash and stretch to it. So it's one texture, but as it plays, I added an animation that stretches it out and then fades it out very quickly so it looks animated and it's not just a static image that appears. So little things like that and little animations can add greatly to your muzzle flash effect. Okay, so we've got our muzzle flash, but it's still kind of weak, and there's some more things we can do to really beef up our shooting mechanics. One of those things, which you'll see here, is to add a light that appears whenever we fire our weapon. So you can see that now I've got this just regular circular gradient light texture, and it illuminates everything around it whenever we fire our weapon. Even this is just a huge boost. Now it feels like there's actual light, there's energy being dispersed when we fire our gun, which is a huge upgrade. It also has the bonus effect of papering over our kind of crappy muzzle flash texture, which, you know, I can say since I drew it, it's pretty terrible. So it kind of just makes it all look better. So just adding a light that appears and turns on when you fire your gun is another huge boost you can add to your firing. Okay, but we're not done there, because we again want to make our firing, and this is true for anything even outside of a top-down shooter, you want to make your important mechanics stand out. They want to feel like an event, like they're or that the player is getting feedback about what they're doing. And so we want our shooting to be something the player notices, that stands out, that the player is aware of. And so another thing we can do, speaking of lights, is not only add a light to our muzzle flash, but add a little bit of an illumination effect to our bullets. So if I fire now, you'll see that our bullets have a slight light attached to them, which makes sense for a projectile that's moving incredibly fast and is dispersing a lot of energy and is, was just exploded basically out of a gun. So now our bullets have a light that kind of matches their yellow texture to them. So that's another huge effect that just kind of adds something to your game. To further show how much of a boost this gives, I've added a little bit of darkness to our game so that the lights will be more noticeable. So now if I fire, you'll see that it really stands out when I'm shooting a weapon. And our bullets, as they travel, have a really nice, just kind of subtle glow effect that emphasizes the fact that there's a dangerous projectile traveling in this direction. And so you can see bullets coming towards you and they stand out, and all of a sudden our game looks and feels much better. We're giving a lot more visual cues to the player about what's important and what they need to be paying attention to. So now we've got nice lights and other effects that are really making our visuals stand out, but we can tweak our visuals even a little bit more just to add that extra feel to it. And one way that we can do that is with particles. Now you'll see I'm using Godot for this demonstration, but this will work with any engine and any particle system that you have. So I've created a quick little bit of muzzle flash particles that will emit not only this sprite that we've been using, but now some particles that will spray out to kind of give the effect of sparks going out from our gun when we fire. So if I play this, you'll see it's pretty simple, but it's just a little bit of particles that decrease in size over time. They only last for half a second, but they just kind of explode out from the muzzle of the gun with a significant amount of velocity, and they kind of go from a yellow to a brownish, or you could do gray, really any color to kind of indicate that, like, hey, these are really energetic, they are hot, they are emitting light, and they're kind of losing energy over time. So now with this, let's run the game and see what it looks like. So now if I fire the weapon, we'll see not only the lights, but also that muzzle flash particles that are coming out of our gun when I fire. And you see how they kind of play off the lights and just add, they're also illuminated. And so it's just another way of giving some feedback of the player doing something. Our weapon is being fired and it looks good, and it's providing a lot of visual feedback to our player that, hey, guns are going off, you should be paying attention. The next thing I've done is to add some audio to our game. So visuals are incredibly important. They're the first thing you work with in a game because you just have to see something in order to play. But audio is something that usually gets neglected or pushed till later on into a project, but it's incredibly important to set a feel for the game. So one thing I've done, and this isn't really related to shooting, but just to add another effect, is to add some footstep audio. So if I walk around, you'll see some really simple, or you'll hear some really simple basic footstep audio that's synced up with when each leg kind of gets to the end of the walk cycle. So something really simple, but it adds a little bit to the game. But what I've also done and added is some weapon firing effects. And if you listen now, whoa, all of a sudden our weapon has a ton of weight to it. And I purposely tried to choose sound effects that were more realistic than they were cartoony or retro, to make it kind of a more realistic gunfire sound. So there's a fair amount of bass in them, and you'll see as it fires that it's getting picked up, that you're hearing something, that there's a weight to the guns that the audio provides that we didn't have before. I've also added some other sounds just to round it out, like switching weapons. These are just things I like to add. These are all the sounds in games like Call of Duty that are there, but you kind of just don't pay attention to, but they just add a huge difference to how your game feels. I mean, notice like now as I switch weapons, you're giving, you don't have to see the weapon being switched. You're given this audio feedback that tells you, hey, I've switched my weapon. I've also added a reload sound. So you'll see there's a little animation and a sound for reloading. And so even that just has a huge difference to our game. And so yeah, now if I walk around and shoot, it just feels totally different now. We've added a ton of weight to our gun, and the combat feels much better already just by adding some simple sound effects. Now, we've gotten the visuals and the sounds of our weapon firing pretty good to go, I'd say, but there's still a little bit more we can do, and that's kind of handling impacts well to give the players some feedback about where bullets are landing, either ones they shot or ones that are landing around them that they need to be careful of. So to that end, I've added some impact particles when our bullets hit either objects in the world or when they hit other players. So here's the world object collision particles. And you'll see there's a little bit of smoke that just appears whenever one of these crates are hit. So it's a very subtle, small effect, but it just gives a little extra layer of feedback that something's happening. And it makes it feel a lot less weird and a little bit more realistic when bullets just disappear after hitting a crate. I've also added feedback and particles to hitting another player. So here's this. So it's a little over the top right now. It's a little more bloody than you'd probably want, but this is just an example of how adding some of these particles can really give some feedback to the player that something's been hit. And so you see we've got this blood spray that comes out. Alright, so the last thing we're going to do in this video to round out our game feel is to now add sound effects to our impacts, just like we did for our weapons. So now we've not only got the particles, but we have sound effects to report to the player that bullets are hitting something. So here you go. Here's the world collision sound. So you can see that when something gets hit, you can kind of feel the thud and the weight of those bullets hitting something. One thing I've done is I use a couple different slightly varied sound effects for these. I'll have links to the places I've gotten these effects from too if you want to use them in your own game. And I also adjust the pitch of these sound effects just slightly by about 10%-ish up and down randomly, and it just provides a little bit of variance to the effects. So you'll kind of hear that they're slightly different each time. And it adds just a little bit of variance. And now I'll show you the sound that happens when you hit another player. So it's kind of a weird sound effect. It's a little bit wet. It's probably not the one I would use in a final game, but it's a good example of just how you can have different sound effects for different types of impacts to give the player an audio cue without actually needing to see that impact happen. So here's our final product. We went from something boring and uninteresting like this to now something much more dynamic and appealing and alive like this. And all it took were some particles, some sound effects, and some really basic graphics. So Anyway, I hope this has been a super helpful video to you and you're able to implement these to increase your own game feel in the games you're working on. If this has been helpful, a like and subscribe to support the channel are always appreciated. Feel free to hop into our Discord. The link to that is in the description. And if you enjoy and find my work helpful, I'd love to have you donate or buy me a coffee, and the link to that is also in the description. Take care. See you in the next video.